When we try to trace the DNA of our financial system, we usually stop looking once we hit the Industrial Revolution. We quote Adam Smith's invisible hand. We argue over Karl Marx, or we nod politely at the Greeks. We convince ourselves that sophisticated economics is a modern invention, a product of skyscrapers, fiber optic cables, and central banks. But there is a quieter, more uncomfortable truth burying itself in the sands of history. Almost 1,000 years ago, centuries before Wall Street, long before the first stock exchange opened in Amsterdam, and ages before the concept of inflation had a name, a solitary scholar in the Middle East sat down and diagnosed the exact sickness that is killing the global economy today. He didn't use spreadsheets. He didn't have a Bloomberg terminal. But he predicted, with terrifying accuracy, what happens when a civilization turns money into a god. He warned that when finance detaches itself from morality, the result isn't just a recession. It is the total rot of the social fabric. If you look at the headlines today, runaway inflation, the erosion of trust, and the widening gap between the ultra-rich and the working poor, it becomes clear this medieval thinker didn't just understand his world. He understood ours. To really grasp the weight of his warning, you have to step out of the modern mindset and into a world that feels both alien and eerily familiar. The year is roughly 1100 CE. In the West, Europe is dark, muddy, and fragmented. It is a patchwork of feudal warlords and subsistence farming, still sweeping up the ashes of the Roman Empire. But look east, and the lights are on. The Islamic Golden Age is at its zenith. The empire stretches from the dust of Persia to the coasts of Spain. Cities like Baghdad and Damascus aren't just settlements. They are global metropolises, roaring with life. They are the New York and London of the medieval world. The Silk Road is pulsing like an artery. Caravans arrive daily loaded with Chinese porcelain, Indian spices, Russian furs, and African gold. The markets are complex. Credit systems are being invented. Checks, known as SAC, are being cashed across borders. It is a time of exploding wealth. But with that wealth comes a shadow. As fortunes are made overnight, inequality begins to tear at the seams of society. The spiritual quiet of the desert is being replaced by the deafening noise of commerce. And standing in the center of this storm is a man named Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali was not an economist. In fact, he would have probably been offended by the title. Born in 1058 in Persia, he was a polymath, a philosopher, a jurist, a theologian. By his 30s, he was arguably the most famous academic in the world, holding the top chair at the prestigious Nizamiya University in Baghdad. He had everything: power, influence, and the ear of sultans. But then, he did something that shocked the elite. He walked away. He looked at the society around him, a society drunk on its own prosperity, obsessed with status, and drowning in materialism, and he felt a profound sickness. He saw a civilization that was growing rich in coin but bankrupt in spirit. He spent the next decade in travel and seclusion, and when he finally put pen to paper to write his masterpiece, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, he didn't just write about prayer. He wrote about the marketplace. Al-Ghazali began to dissect money, not how to make it, but what it does to the human soul and the stability of nations. He asked a question that modern economists are terrified to answer. Is money a tool for exchange, or is it a weapon of control? This is where Al-Ghazali's genius shines, and where he parts ways with the thinkers of the West. Aristotle saw money as a convenience. Modern economists see it as data. Al-Ghazali saw it as a mirror. He argued that money, by itself, is barren. It has no intrinsic value. You cannot eat a gold dinar. You cannot wear a silver dirham to keep warm. Like a mirror, money has no color of its own. It only reflects the value of the things placed before it. Its only purpose is to act as a judge, a neutral standard that allows a farmer to trade wheat for a weaver's cloth without arguing over how many bushels equal a shirt. He wrote that God created money to be a mediator and a facilitator. But here is the catch. When you start treating the mirror as if it is the object of beauty rather than what it reflects, you break reality. When people start chasing money for money's sake, accumulating zeros in a ledger rather than creating value, the economy ceases to be a system of trade and becomes a system of oppression. From this philosophy, Al-Ghazali launched his first major attack, the condemnation of hoarding. In the medieval world, Wealthy merchants would often bury gold in the ground or lock it in vaults to protect their status. To the average observer, this was just prudence. To Al-Ghazali, it was a social crime. He used a visceral biological metaphor that still holds up today. He viewed the economy as a living body and money as the blood. As long as blood circulates, it carries oxygen to the muscles, nutrients to the organs, and life to the limbs. But what happens when you hoard? You stop the flow. You create a clot. Al-Ghazali argued that when the wealthy remove money from circulation, they are effectively imprisoning the sovereign of the market. They are strangling the working class, not because there aren't enough resources, but because the medium to access them has been taken hostage. Whoever hoards money, he suggested, is discarding the blessing of God. They are taking a public utility and turning it into a private weapon. If you look at the trillions of dollars sitting idle in offshore accounts or corporate war chests today, while velocity of money slows down, you realize Al-Ghazali wasn't just talking about gold chests. He was talking about capital inefficiency. But if hoarding was a crime, speculation was a sin. Al-Ghazali was a strong supporter of business. He praised the honest merchant who took risks, crossed deserts, and brought goods to the people. That was productive risk. But he had zero tolerance for the parasite, the speculator. He identified a specific type of corruption, profiting from the misery or confusion of others. He condemned those who manipulated prices to create artificial scarcity. He lashed out at merchants who would buy up all the grain during a harvest only to sell it back at extortionate rates during a drought. He saw this not as smart business, but as theft disguised as trade. He understood the concept of information asymmetry 900 years before the term existed. He argued that a market only functions if there is trust. If a seller hides a defect, or if a lender creates a complex debt trap that the borrower cannot understand, the transaction is void of morality. He warned that an economy built on speculation, on making money from money rather than from goods or services, creates a bubble that must eventually burst. When you look at the 2008 financial crisis or the crypto bubbles of recent years, you are looking at the exact scenario Al-Ghazali predicted, a detachment of price from reality. Perhaps his most chilling insight, however, was reserved for the government itself. In the 11th century, rulers had a favorite trick. When they ran out of money for wars or palaces, they would recall the gold coins, melt them down, mix them with cheaper metals like copper, and reissue them with the same face value. It was the medieval version of turning on the money printer. Al-Ghazali stood firmly against this. He declared that the integrity of the currency was a sacred trust between the ruler and the ruled. He argued that when a state debases its currency, it is stealing from its own citizens in slow motion. It is a stealth tax. It destroys the savings of the poor, who cannot hedge against the loss of value, while the wealthy find ways to protect their assets. He predicted the psychological fallout of inflation. He warned that if a ruler plays games with the coinage, the people will eventually lose faith in the state symbol. They will stop using the local currency and switch to foreign coins or barter. We have seen this play out in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, and in the creeping anxiety of every Western consumer watching their grocery bills double. Al-Ghazali knew that money is a belief system, and once the state breaks that belief, the system collapses. What makes Al-Ghazali's economic theory so powerful is that it wasn't really about math. It was about psychology. He understood that economies don't crash because of numbers. They crash because of human nature. They crash because of fear. They crash because of greed. He argued that you cannot legislate a healthy economy if the participants are morally corrupt. You can have all the regulations in the world, but if the banker, the merchant, and the politician are driven by an insatiable desire to accumulate more than they need, the system will find a way to break. He saw the economy as a moral ecosystem. When people trust that the money in their pocket is real and that the merchant across the table is honest, prosperity flourishes. But when every man for himself becomes the operating logic, the social contract dissolves. Fast forward to today. We live in a world that Al-Ghazali would recognize instantly. We have built an economic engine of unparalleled power, yet we are plagued by the same anxieties he wrote about in 1100 CE. We see wealth growing while standards of living stagnate. We see a financial sector that often treats money as a casino chip rather than a tool for development. We see nations drowning in debt, solving problems by diluting the value of their currency, hoping the bill never comes due. Al-Ghazali's warning is echoing off the glass walls of every central bank in the world. You cannot build a permanent prosperity on a foundation of temporary tricks. History doesn't repeat itself, but human nature does. Al-Ghazali teaches us that economics is not a science of charts and graphs. It is a science of behavior. It is about how we treat one another. He reminds us that money is a mirror. If our society is greedy, fearful, and deceptive, our economy will reflect that chaos back at us. If we want financial stability, we don't just need better interest rate policies or smarter algorithms. We need to fix the incentives that drive us. A civilization that gets rich without getting wise is just building a taller tower on shifting sand. And as this medieval scholar knew, gravity always wins in the end. If you want to understand the future of the global economy, stop looking at the ticker tape. Look at the mirror. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lost history of economics, make sure to like and subscribe. The past is filled with answers, and we're here to uncover them.